Hello everyone, thank you for joining this webinar, Finding the Right Pharma Suppliers, Sourcing and Compliance Made Easy, jointly organized by Eurofins Healthcare Assurance and Pharmaoffer. My name is Fiona, I'm from the marketing team of Eurofins Assurance, your moderator today. So before we begin, I would just like to go over a few webinar rules with you. Obviously, you are muted to keep the room quiet. So if you want to raise any questions or send us any message, please type them in the question box. All presentation will take about 40 minutes, so there will be roughly 15 minutes left for the Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, so you will get an email containing the recording link as well as the presentation file of the two speakers in the coming 1 or 2 days. There will be a post-webinar survey after you leave the webinar room. I hope you can spare 2 or 3 minutes filling it in and let us know how we perform today. Now I would like to introduce the two speakers to you. First, we have Danilo Momo, Business Unit Manager of Eurofins Healthcare Assurance Italy. Danilo has more than 10 years of experience in GXP compliance. He held different QA roles at different pharmaceutical industry, including medical devices, API, and medicinal products. He has strong expertise in R&D, supplier qualification, and also regulatory compliance. Also with us today is Ammar Badwy, CEO and co-founder of Pharmaoffer. Ammar began his career in a pharma manufacturing companies in the marketing stream, and then later he has observed a really big gap in efficiency in the global API sourcing, and that had triggered him to develop and establish Pharmaoffer back in 2017. The aim of Pharmaoffer is to connect buyers and suppliers of the API and CDMO field seamlessly. Now I would like to just go through the webinar agenda quickly with all of you. We will first begin with Ammar's presentation where he will talk about effective pharmaceutical sourcing tips, followed by Danilo's part, which he will talk about qualification of suppliers and regulatory requirements. And at the end, of course, there will be the question and answer sections. And without further ado, I will invite Ammar to begin his presentation. Over to you, Ammar. And I'll be back later for the Q&A. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. Hello, everyone. Yes, so what I really like is that everyone is here to join this webinar. Everyone in the world is dependent on what we are doing, also in the API market. Basically, all medicine contain an API, so I think it's very important to focus on efficiency in the pharmaceutical industry because we have a direct impact on the global population. Short about me, I'm Ammar Badwy. I'm living here in the Netherlands. I have a Dutch mother and an Egyptian father. And a couple of years ago, I founded Pharmaoffer because I was basically frustrated about how difficult it was to find qualified suppliers and how dependent you were on trading companies, indenting companies, companies that just connect party A with B. And I really wanted to solve that in a way that is more in line with how we usually use tools to get information. We are active right now in more than 200 countries. We have helped. We are helping 1.5 million yearly users, pharma users, to find reliable suppliers in the API and CDMO market. There are different reasons why people need APIs. Usually, when they join our platform, they're looking for a supplier because they started a new project and they need an API for that. Or they are looking for an alternative supplier for an API that they are buying already. Sometimes it's for resale purposes. They have a client who needs the APIs, or they are trying to buy the API for them. Or it's like really in an R&D stage where they need like a small quantity to do research. What I would like to cover today is how to effectively compare and approach API suppliers. How does your request look like from the supplier perspective? I think that can be very useful in order to get better responses. How to gather the right information to strengthen your negotiation position, and how to increase your chances of a successful outcome. I know that the API market is not always easy. We really consider this a seller's market, which means that suppliers are really in charge and decide who they want to work with and who not. So that means that many buyers, when they reach out to suppliers, they also don't get a response, or the supplier doesn't want to deliver to them. There's also quite a lack of transparency. That was also one of the reasons why we wanted to start Pharmaoffer back then. Because of the lack of transparency, there are a lot of trading companies. Imagine that if you are starting a one-man trading company and you're able to connect a manufacturer and a buyer, you might be able to live an entire year from the profit that will bring you. So that means there are a lot of trading companies in the supply chain. And it's also not easy to contact suppliers. So even if you find a supplier and you go to the website, you fill in a contact form, in most cases, you will not even get a response. Also really typical for our industry is the sourcing process is really slow. So imagine that your current supplier is not able to deliver today, then you don't have a new supplier approved by tomorrow. So usually that process that really takes a lot of time, which also means that you're quite dependent to your current suppliers. So what I would like to do is, let's do this process together. So let's say we're working for a pharma company, ABC Pharma, located in Argentina, and we're looking for an alternative source for tramadol API. And the source need to be GMP certified. We need a SEP and the open part of the DMF. So where to start? Well, there are different ways where you can find suppliers. Of course, there are the platforms like Pharmaoffer, where you can search for supplier, compare, and contact them. You can also use search engines like Google, regulatory databases like the EDQM or FDA. There are trade databases where you can find relevant information in order who's selling a certain API. Exhibitions are important, although I also think that they are really good in order to improve your relationship with current suppliers. Within your network, you can always check within your network, like, hey, I'm looking for this supplier. Do you know where I can find it? And nowadays, there are also AI search tools that can help you guide you into the right direction. Okay, so let's say we found the supplier and we're going to contact them. So, hi, I'm Ammar from ABC Pharma, and I would like to find out more about ordering 250 gram tramadol. Please share best price and COA. So what I would like to show you is that when we're going to send this message to the supplier will probably not be enthusiastic immediately. So their first response is like, who is this buyer? And why did they choose us? At this point, they're probably expect that maybe you also, or maybe we also approached 30 or 40 other suppliers. What they also wonder is, will they eventually buy our product? Because they also know that the process, the sourcing process, take months or sometimes even years. So they need to have a good faith that we're might requesting some information right now, but will we also buy it eventually? And also, how profitable will this project be? Maybe we will buy some small quantities, but then in the end, the process of onboarding a new client and spending quite some time in this process, this prior process before we buy, might be so expensive for them that they prefer not even to respond. So something that we have learned is that it's really important to provide enough information while you approach suppliers in order to really gather their interest. So it's important to introduce yourself. So who are you? So in this case, my name is Ammar. I'm the purchase manager of ABC Pharma. Also important, what does your company do? So not only the name, but also what do you focus on? So in this case, generic medicine for the Latin American market, and we do that for over 35 years, blah, 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 blah. Also, why are you now looking for a new supplier? Okay, so in this case, we're going to say, well, we have supply problems with our first source, and we are urgently looking for an alternative source. In this case, the supplier understands like, okay, that means that we are probably able to proceed quickly because we are buying the API already. Also, of course, the product specifications and certificates. If we are not able to mention what we are looking for from a quality perspective, they will probably expect that we are not so familiar in the pharma industry, so we're just requesting something. And of course, we know exactly what we need. So in this case, it's we need a GMP certificate, we need the SAP and the DMF, and we prefer to have tramadol USP grade. Where do we need the API for? In this case, we need 3 batches for some testing. So and after that, we want to we want to produce retard tablets of 100 milligram and 200 milligram. And then why did you contact us? I think this is also a really important question, and I think you can compare it a little bit with, imagine that you are looking for a new colleague, and during the hiring process, you're sitting in front of someone, and this person is saying, yeah, I'm looking for this, and I don't want to spend too much time traveling to the office, and I want this, that. Well, in such cases, you actually really want to hear from them, like, why did you chose us to apply for the job? Did this person do some research, and did this person really find a match why it's important that we're sitting together here? And I think that's what we should do here as well. Show that you have did some research and pick some points that got your interest. And of course, very important is, what quantity do you need? You should mention this on the short term. So here it's we need some samples for testing, and right now we are buying 5,000 kilograms per year, but we expect that this will be 20,000 in 2 years annual quantity. Important to mention, because if you only mention what you need right now, but you don't give any timeline, or the other way around, then the supplier doesn't really know what the real potential is. We also did some research on our platform. So we helped about 30,000 buyers connecting with suppliers, and we checked like what has the most impact on a positive outcome. And what we consider a positive outcome is that there's communication going on and that the supplier respond to the request. And what we see quite clearly is that if we take a look at the message that contains only 3 or less of the 7 topics that I've shown here, then only 32% of these requests get a response. And if we take a look at the messages that contains 5 or more of the topics that you see here on the left, then the response rate is 92%. So you see here how important the quality of your content is. It's also important that you're using the right information, because you don't want this to be one big black box, that you have no idea who the supplier is, that you have no idea what the API is that you are requesting. So I found it important to understand, what is the unique selling point of this supplier? Are they very specialized in something, or do they have a lot of experience with selling to your market? Also, do some research about what's their reputation. Usually I Google a lot using these quote marks and see what I can find of this supplier. Also very important to know the average price of the API that you are requesting. In many cases, people have no idea. They're looking for an API, but they have no idea what is an average price. So they basically have to accept any offer that they receive. And also, I would like to know, before I'm going to buy from a supplier, like, what other clients do they serve? Do they serve multinationals or companies that are similar to ours? Do they have experience with selling to my country? Because I also would like to know that. And there is quite some interesting data that you can use to understand this better. So, for example, here this is based on trade data. You can really see what is the average price of an API, and you can even see transactions. Here, for example, someone bought 5,000 kilogram of this API, and they were paying about $24 per kilogram. This is very useful information, and then you can also search for the supplier and see like to who are they selling. And yeah, that is something that is, I mean, you don't really, the information that you get here, you don't really need to use it immediately when you reach out to the supplier, but at least you have the benchmark of what is a fair price, and yeah, what is the reputation of this supplier. So things that I would like to avoid is sending too general inquiry messages. Because yeah, you will, in many cases, you will just not get a response to that. Also, unrealistic expectations. Sometimes people say like, yeah, we need 10,000 kilogram per year, but then eventually when they're buying, oh yeah, they were just buying 25 kilogram. I mean, this is a very relationship-based market, so don't share expectations that are not realistic. It will really damage also your relationship with the supplier. It's also important to keep the communication going. So once you have received a response from a supplier, usually there will be a lot of back and forth about the price of the API, the certificates that you need. Sometimes you need some input from their quality team. So there will be a lot of communication here. It's important to keep this communication going, because at a certain point, people will not know anymore, like, oh yeah, what were we waiting for? Did I needed to do something, or are we waiting for them? And then even in such cases, it might be possible that that the communication will stop just because, yeah, it was not. We're losing momentum over there. Also, we are in the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, quality is the most important part. So also in this very first process, make sure that you share what is relevant to you. If you just say like, well, I'm just looking for the API and that's it, yeah, that's actually quite a weird request, because then it almost look like you're not from the pharmaceutical industry. So if you know what you need, just share that with them. Ask for a certificate of analysis so you can check yourself if they have the right product before you proceed. So to summarize, I think it's important to compare the suppliers before you're approaching them. So in case there are 40 suppliers who are selling an API, don't approach all 40 of them. Just make sure that you gather the right information, that you know which 3 or 4 are relevant for you, and then you approach them and also tell them why you are approaching them. Also, you're not just buying, you're partnering up. So yeah, don't say things like, yeah, okay, I'm looking for this, is that, and I want to buy it. And no, I mean, this is your future new partner. So also spend some time in create a level of trust, because that will really help you in case you have any problems in the future. You also want the help of this supplier in order to solve this. Use data, because then yeah, you will be much better prepared and you will have a much better negotiation position, and be honest about timelines, quantities, and the project in general. And with honest, I don't mean that you only have to share positive stories. Like in our example right now, we said we were looking for an alternative supplier, which means we can proceed quickly. But even if you are in a very early stage of a new project and it might take like 2 more years before you're going to buy this API, also be transparent about that, because suppliers really consider it as a red flag if everything sounds too positive. So be honest about that. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, then I would like to give the mic to Danilo, who will talk more about this process from a quality perspective.
Okay, thank you, Ammar, for the nice presentation about sourcing of APIs and raw materials for the pharmaceutical market. So I'm focusing now more on the quality aspects and the quality part of the qualification of the suppliers. So who am I? I'm Danilo Momo. I'm in Italy, and I have experience as a lead auditor since 10 years, and I've performed about more than 400 audits in Europe. And I am now the business unit manager in Italy for Eurofins Healthcare Assurance, that is a provider of services for healthcare industries like audits for the qualification of suppliers, and also qualification, validation, consulting and training activities. So when we talk about the GMP, there is a wide scenario of several standards. The main one, the more global one, maybe is the WHO, that is for the World Health Organization, that is applicable in over 100 countries. Then there are specific GMP standards that are quite important in the industries. The main ones are in Europe, the European GMP, in the US, the FDA GMP, and in Brazil, the Anvisa legislation. Then there are other specific guidelines in other markets, for example, in Canada, in Japan, in Korea, and so on. Anyway, all of these international regulations are quite similar each other. The structure is similar. The requirements are applicable to most of them. Then for each region, there are some specificities, like for example, in Brazil, there are different climate zone conditions, so also the requirements for an API to be exported to Brazil should comply with the climate zone of Brazil. And for the APIs, there is this guideline that is the ISHQ7, that is an harmonized standard across the regions. So when we talk about GMP, there are several aspects. The main one is the quality inside the company to ensure that the production and the control of product meet the standards of quality, both the regulatory requirements and the internal requirements that are defined for a product. It is important to ensure the full documentation and traceability at each step, from the purchasing to the manufacturing, the control and the distribution of a product. To be sure that the personnel working in the company is well trained and is following hygiene rules. That processes are validated, like manufacturing process, cleaning processes, analytical methods, and so on, and that the equipment is well qualified, maintained, and calibrated. It's also important to ensure that there is no contamination, like cross-contamination between different batches that are produced. And there are several preventive measures in place, like the adoption of clean rooms or cleaning activities. And another topic that is very important and will be the main focus for this short webinar is the qualification of the supply chain, to be sure that all the suppliers and subcontractors that are involved in the production of medicinal products are verified, are qualified, and are approved by the company. So there are five main steps when we talk about the supply chain GMP compliance. The first one is the selection of the good supplier or service provider. Then it's important to qualify, so to have a qualification of the supplier, and approval, so taking the decision to approve that supplier, the monitoring and the requalification during the time. And I put as a reference an extract from the European GMP guidelines, but we will see other similarities in other guidelines. And in particular, in Europe, there is the Chapter 5 that should be followed by the manufacturers of medicinal products, where there is written basically the expectations of the authorities for the qualification of the starting materials, packaging materials, and the concept of audits to be done at these sites. So going more deep in each topic, for the selection, the first thing should be to be sure that you are selecting the right supplier. So not only the economic conditions are important, but also the quality conditions with that supplier. So you should verify the legal status registries of this supplier, as well as the certificates that are in place. So if it is a manufacturer, the GMP certificate, it can be found in the public databases of the regulatory agencies, or can be asked to the supplier to get a copy of this certificate, or the GDP certificate for the distribution of a medicinal product or of an API, where it is available, because unfortunately not everywhere the authorities are releasing these GDP certificates. Like in Italy, there is still slowness about this topic. Then also the quality management system should be evaluated to be sure that the supplier is following a set of quality items that are expected to be compliant. And this can be verified through a questionnaire. You can send your own supplier qualification questionnaire or ask for a self-assessment, and to perform an audit, preferably on site, to evaluate what's the real situation at your supplier. So for the qualification purpose, you assess if the supplier is meeting the requirements that you have set for them. And this is also based on a risk-based approach, because it's important to perform a risk assessment for your suppliers, because not all of them are the same, and to define the category of the supplier based on different aspects like the legislation. For example, if a supplier is in Europe, then should have the European GMP certificate, the product or service destination where you are using this material provided by the supplier, and the definition of the category based on the impact on the GMP. Then the supplier should be approved. So you should verify the quality of the service that is provided and the product is delivered by the supplier. and the approval should take in consideration aspects like price, if there are changes in supplier that are critical, that are important, the quality that is delivered, so the timelines, condition, and accuracy of such products, the quality of the service that is provided, the check of the documentation, if it is complete, and the traceability of the records, the licenses and certificates, if they are still valid and up to date, if there is any action plan implemented following, for example, an audit, and of course the audits that should be performed. Okay, so then there should be performed monitoring during the time on this supplier to verify if the necessary requirements are still met to provide the product or service, and to check the quality of the products when the products are received at the warehouse, to verify some documents like the certificate of analysis, for example, and to evaluate the product. So it should be sampled and tested at the manufacturer. The deviations arise with that particular product, and the ability of the supplier to be able to do good problem solving, to execute the action plans as defined by the supplier, what is the delivery time, if it is according to what has been agreed or not, to check if the quality of the product is the same according to the purchasing order, and the pricing, of course, this is still an item that should be evaluated. Then there should be set a regular schedule to re-qualify the suppliers over the time at a defined frequency. For example, for the manufacturers of APIs, this should be done every 3 years, and the same for primary packaging materials. And the qualifications are done to confirm that suppliers are still meeting the required standards. Then last, but anyway, this is also an important aspect in the cycle of the supply chain qualification and compliance. You should have in your system the possibility to disqualify a supplier, to prevent that you are using a supplier that is not meeting anymore the qualification criteria, and so you should not make any supply from them. It could happen if, for example, you are discovering a critical issue during your audit, or if you are notified from the regular authorities that an inspection has been done at that site and the GMP certificate was revoked. And in that case, you should do a recall of all the products from the market. So I put here just an old example of almost 10 years ago of a supplier of APIs in India that was micronizing APIs. They were inspected at that time from the National Regulatory Agency from France, and there were found several deficiencies, some of them critical and major, and as an outcome of this inspection, the GMP certificate was revoked, as well as the certificates of suitability. And for this reason, the buyers of that supplier, they were obliged to recall all the products that were distributed in the market. So that's also why it is important that buyers, they do their own audits, because they could anticipate this and see if there is any critical issue with a supplier. There are different categories that undergo to the qualification process. For example, for raw materials, in that case are the excipients and the APIs for a buyer of medicines, or the starting materials for a manufacturer of API. And you should clearly define which are the category and specification for that specific product, because not all the products are classified and qualified in the same way. For example, there are differences between an excipient and an active pharmaceutical ingredient. Then you should be able to demonstrate that there are no contaminants in these products, like nitrosamines, elemental impurities, residual solvents, and so on. You should obtain a certificate of analysis from each supply, from each batch of that material. During the qualification process, you should perform an additional testing and also other studies like a process validation with that new supplier, as well to perform audits to that supplier. For the packaging material, this is more or less the same concept, and in this case, of course, the type of material is different, and it's important to demonstrate that there are no that the material that is purchased is compatible with the drug product to which it is in contact. And there are also several services in the supply chain of a pharma buyer. There are some of them that are more critical and other ones that are less critical, and also the compliance to the regulatory requirements is different. But anyway, each service should be qualified, should be approved through an audit if it is a critical service like a laboratory testing, or a qualification, self-assessments, check of the certificates in place, and so on for the other cases. Then, when we are talking about outsourced activities, the EU-GMP guidelines, they tell us that there should be in place a contract. This contract is not what is meant in a commercial agreement where there are different aspects beyond quality to be considered, but it's a quality agreement. So the focus is on the quality of the service that is provided. So there are some key differences between the two kinds of agreements. The purpose of a commercial agreement is focused on the sale, on the pricing, payment, delivery, liability, and there are penalties on the non-payment or late delivery. So this is very sales-oriented. A quality agreement instead set a series of rules for the quality specification, testing procedures, compliance, and to be sure that the quality is guaranteed by the subcontractor. An important function that is in place in the European GMP guidelines is the qualified person. The qualified person is the most responsible for the quality of drug product, because they need to issue a certificate for each batch of medicinal product that is distributed in the market. And they have the responsibility to be sure that the supply chain is qualified and that the audits are performed when and as required. So the main responsibilities when we talk about supply chain for EcoP are to identify which are the regulatory requirements to base the qualification of the supply chain, to perform the audits, so to have a plan of external audits and to be sure that these audits are performed according to the plan, to evaluate the compliance of the supplier, to monitor it during time, and to be sure that each change that is having an impact on the compliance is properly communicated and assessed by the buyer, by the copy. The qualified persons can rely on the use of audits performed by third parties, like auditing companies like Eurofins. Anyway, it is important that the QP is performing a final assessment on the audit report that is provided, to have a written summary about the evaluation of the audit, what has been pointed out by the auditor, to be sure that the audit content is proper, that is according to contractual agreements, because the auditing party is one of the services that falls under the outsourced activities, so there should be a quality agreement. The scope of the audit is proper, the auditor is competent, the audit frequency is proper, and if there are any corrective actions, they are properly described by the supplier. And also it is very important in this case to be sure that there is no conflict of interest between the auditor, the auditing company, and the supplier that is being audited. Here at the Eurofins Healthcare Assurance, we comply with these requirements. We have a dedicated quality system. We are certified ISO 9001 for the quality. We use auditors that are well experienced and qualified according to our procedures. There is no conflict of interest. We have statements for that. Each auditor signs a code of ethics, and also we offer the possibility to have shared audits and to purchase existing audit reports, because nowadays sometimes it is very difficult to book an audit date at a certain supplier, because there are many requirements of audits from all the buyers in the world. So what we try to do is to group as many customers as possible in a shared audit, to reduce the burden at the supplier, and to also offer more benefits to the buyers that will have less cost to perform the audit, because they will participate to something that is shared with other buyers, or to buy something that is already available in the case there is urgency to have that audit report. And we have an online library where all these audits are listed. So to have a recap of the items for the supply chain GMP compliance, it is important that each buyer prioritize the supplier qualification, because the supply chain is very important for the efficiency of your processes according to the GMP standards, to have a strong supplier relationship, to be sure that there are contracts in place and the audits are performed as required, to have a risk-based approach to identify if there is any risk, and to maintain a robust documentation to be sure that we have everything traced and ready to show to the authorities or to other inspectors. So this was my part.
Okay, thank you, Danilo. So now we move on with the final sections, the Q&A. So let me set us up for the Q&A while you two take a quick break. So Ammar, you are back with us?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions on hand. If you still have any questions, don't hesitate, don't be shy, and let us know by typing it in. So let's begin with the first questions. I believe the first questions would be for Ammar. So the attendee is asking about Do you see any sourcing patterns among your customer in the pharma offer? And any changes, especially after the tariffs and all the dramatical changes in the political and the economic landscape?
Um, yeah, so usually what we see um, if there's anything going on in the world, so for example, with tariffs or pandemic or trade wars, then usually we see a peak in search behavior, which means that a lot of people they start to act once they are forced a little bit to do something, so they need to change supplier quickly. Um, for example, during the pandemic, what we saw was um, that there was a lot of uncertainty in the market. People were buying more than they needed, same as what we saw with in supermarkets here with toilet paper. They were buying more than they needed, and then suppliers were out of stock. So then their other clients needed to search for new suppliers. Um, I mean, that is of course something that you could do, but usually you are in a much better position if you start searching for suppliers if there's no uh, urgent urgency or so usually when your first supplier is able to deliver, that is actually still the best possible moment to look for an alternative source.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question, I will assign it to Danilo. So it is about there is a new FD announcement recently that they will run an announced audit to oversee site for the pharma industry. So how should we get prepared for this unannounced audit or inspection?
Yes, this is right. So this is breaking news. There is this new attention, this new focus coming from USA to foreigners to other markets. Up to now, most of the inspections done by FDA to manufacturers of APIs, of materials, or of drug products that were exported to the US were announced audits. Now they are changing this. They will increase the amount of audits that are not announced. So from one day to the other, there is the possibility that one or more than one inspector from a US FDA, they will knock at the door of the manufacturer, and they will require to enter in the facility and to perform the inspection. This is a bit new in the pharma industries. It happens in other markets, in other certification standards, but for pharma, this is something new. So it is important that the company is always up to date with the compliance to GMP requirements. What could be useful is also to ask to a consultant or an auditing company to perform such kind of an announced audits at their facilities to test the readiness of their personnel of the facility itself to host such kind of an announced audits.
Okay, thank you, Danilo. So the next one, I think it is would be for also Ammar again. So it is also a good consequence. A second question for the first one. You have mentioned looking for a new market amid all the changes. And this question is about what are your tips or advice if I need to find a suppliers in a total new market that I have never worked with?
um, yeah, so maybe a little bit obvious, but I would come to our platform to at least see which suppliers are available. Um, and yeah, so uh, I don't know what's exactly considered a new market, because in many cases, when you need an API, which is a bit different than from product categories that you are already familiar with, that is what you can consider a new market. But yeah, I think then the research is even more important to better understand who they are. But there are a lot of questions that you should also ask to the suppliers themselves. So I think it's a very normal question to ask a supplier, like, why does your current suppliers choose to work with you instead of similar suppliers? Because what they give as a response is already very valuable to understand um, more about who you're dealing with, and to learn more about this market as well.
Okay, thank you. So the next one, I will give it to Danilo. So is it mandatory? Is it mandatory to have the approval of the audit report by the QP? Or is it possible to delegate that of responsibility to a trained personnel?
Okay, I see. So for Europe, when there are the drug manufacturers, as I showed also in the presentation, the responsibility falls under the European qualified person. So there could be a deputy of the QP inside the company. This must be identified. It should be also approved by the local regulatory agency that this person can act as a deputy of the QP. And this is also something that is needed, of course, when there are companies performing lots of activities, having many products and so on. One copy is usually not enough for this. But anyway, the responsibility can't be delegated to other people that are not the copy. Of course, the quality department can collect all the documents, everything that is needed to perform a judgment about if to release or not the drug product to the market and submit this to the qualified person. But legally, the role of the qualified person can't be delegated to another function that is not authorized to do such by the authorities. Then there are, so this is for Europe. Other markets are not the same, and there are maybe quality directors, there are other functions that can anyway take the responsibility and decision to use or not supplier. But for Europe, there is this legal person.
Okay, the next one going back to Ammar. So if I don't hear anything if after purchasing from a vendor, the vendor don't respond to me in the further discussion, what can I do?
After you have purchased from the vendor, yeah, that would be actually not something that you expect, because then you are already able to buy from them. But yeah, I mean, if your contact person from the supplier is not giving any responses, I would definitely try, if you can find someone else within the company. Um, you can try it, of course, through Pharmaoffer, but also maybe on LinkedIn, try to find someone else within the company, and otherwise, then just call them and make sure that you get any response.
Okay, so I have got one question from the private message, so I won't be able to assign it to you, Danilo. But there is a question about, is there any timeline to re-qualify the supplier? I think you can take this one, Danilo.
Yes, okay. So first thing is to evaluate the category and criticality of that supplier. If it is an API, then you need to qualify this supplier at the beginning before to start the manufacturing at your site. Or anyway, you can start to manufacture a drug product at your site, but you can't release this in the market until when all the documentation is approved, and of course also the audit has been done and has been evaluated as satisfactory. Because based on this set of documentation, the qualified person will issue a QP declaration and that everything is fine and the product can be certified and can be distributed in the market. So first thing is to do an initial audit. Then for APIs, primary packaging material, laboratories that are performing testing for the release of a product, contract manufacturers of tablets and so on. They usually are audited every 3 years. Then there are cases where they are audited even more frequently based on the risk, on the criticality, or can be longer the frequency, but this should be assessed and the reason should be explained why the frequency is not 3 years, but for example 4 years or 5 years. Then there are other cases like excipients that are less critical or secondary packaging material and so on that they can be audited even every 5 years. So yeah, if the question was this about the frequency is
Mm,
depending on the risk priorities that you are defining on
mm,
your acceptance and qualification criteria.
mm. So maybe if you guys are interested in one sections on the risk assessment, just let us know in the comment box or in the post webinar survey. We can plan it around for you maybe later this year. Then we will have another questions. This one is for Ammar. What are the most common mistake buyer makes when they are selecting an API supplier, and how they can be avoided?
Good question. I think what I would consider a mistake is approaching a supplier that doesn't fit at all. So, for example, there are buyers who are looking for the cheapest price possible. Then I would not contact a supplier who has all the qualifications in place and has a reputation of having the purest quality. Um, but also the other way around, of course. So that's why I said, like, if there are maybe 40 suppliers for a certain API, make sure that you find what is important for you, so that you only contact suppliers that are relevant to you, because otherwise it's a waste of time for the supplier, but more importantly also for yourself.
Mm. Okay, then I guess we will have our last question for today. We know that there are a few questions that haven't been answered yet. Don't worry, we will follow up through email. Last question of today. Is HALA certificate a mandatory requirement for all APIs? This one for Danilo, I guess.
Mandatory, it depends on the requirements of the buyers. There are buyers that they want the halal certificate, so in that case, it's mandatory. It's not mandatory for the European GMP to have the halal certificate, but it's written that anyway the buyer should define all the acceptance criteria. So if among the acceptance criteria, there is also the halal certificate, then it should be something that should be required mandatory to the supplier because me as buyer, I want this. Then there are other regulatory topics as nitrosamines, elemental impurities, and so on that are defined by several other legislation, other regulatory requirements in the EU, US, Brazilian markets, and so on. And in that case, yes, they are mandatory.
Mm. Okay, so we have finished all the questions. The remaining one will follow through email, don't worry. So thank you so much for joining us today and also the effort of the two speakers in preparing their presentation. I hope you liked our section today. Again, just a little favor to ask from you that to fill in the post-webinar survey and let us know how we perform or what you want to hear next from us. Until we meet again, take care and goodbye. Thank you also Danilo and Ammar. Thank you everyone. Bye bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.